In order to support the show, we will need the help of some great advertisers. And to find great advertisers, we need to learn a little bit more about you. So if you have time, please go to podsurvey.com/fictional and take a quick anonymous survey that'll help us get to know you a little bit better. Even if you've taken another podcast listener survey before, even for a show that's extremely similar to this and that I also narrate, this one is specific to fictional. So we really need you to take this one too. Plus, once you've completed the survey, you can enter to win a $100 Amazon gift card. Again, that's podsurvey.com/fictional, FICTIONAL. Thanks so much for your help. Previously on Fictional, the poet Dante and the ghost of the poet Virgil were on a trip through hell. They had seen some pretty messed up stuff so far, and they came to the area containing the Minotaur, and their first plan was to avoid it, as is sound advice for any Minotaur encounter, but that went right out the window when they turned the corner, and the mythological beast saw them and lowered its head to charge. Virgil took one look at the fierce Minotaur and knew what he had to do. "Forget what I said, Dante," he shouted. "Plan B. Be really, really mean." The pair yelled at the creature, hurling insults left and right, until he became so disoriented and blind with rage that he turned to the sky, shaking with anger and bellowing. That's when Dante and Virgil made their break, escaping past the emotionally distraught beast as he wailed. At last, the Minotaur turned his attention back to the intruders, stomping the ground to charge, only to find that Dante and Virgil had disappeared. For a while, he searched everywhere for the pair, but in the end, he just returned to wandering aimlessly in the dark, because that's all the Minotaur ever does. I'm Jason Weiser. From Bardic, this is Fictional. Dante and Virgil fled the scene, but they weren't finished with the Greek mythology allusions just yet. And actually, they never are. There, in the darkness, flowed a boiling river of blood. Centaurs patrolled up and down both banks, and in the river, people were constantly being boiled alive. "You want to know the symbolism behind this one?" Virgil asked. "Nah, I think I got it," Dante replied, staring in disbelief. "You sure, big guy?" "Yeah. These people were violent against their own kind. Tyrants, highwaymen, murderers. They lived their lives wallowing in metaphorical blood. Now they spend their afterlife immersed in actual, very painful blood." "Fair enough," Virgil said, picking at a cuticle. "Well, it isn't exactly subtle," Dante remarked, turning to his guide. Over Virgil's shoulder, Dante saw one of the centaurs staring them down. "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa," they heard as the centaurs who patrolled the river trotted over to them. "Sorry, but you guys are going to have to turn back. We have orders. No one goes in or out of the boiling river of blood." Virgil explained that Dante was on a tour. Hell, purgatory, heaven, full redemption package. So they needed to go through. "That's so. I'm going to need to see your ID cards," the centaur fired back, looking down at the pair and lowering his very reflective aviators. "What?" Dante asked. "It's 13th century Italy. We don't have ID cards." "No IDs then. It's going to be a problem. I'm going to need to get my supervisor. Wait here." The supervisor approached, and he introduced himself. He was Chiron, the wise and temperate centaur who used to run a mythological daycare, where he had raised Achilles, Jason of the Argonauts fame, and many others. These days, he was managing centaurs beside the river of blood. He wasn't going to give the pair any problems, and he handed them off to Nessus, another centaur who kind of killed Hercules. He knew a shallow spot in the river where they could cross. Virgil asked them how he liked working beside the river of blood. Nessus replied that there were good things and there were bad things. The centaurs liked shooting humans, so at least they got to do what they loved. The downside was, well, they were in hell. Nessus liked it only because he was known as the killer of Hercules, and so many of these centaurs had been murdered by Hercules at one time or another, so that little reputation boost was nice. Dante and Virgil crossed the river carefully, noting Alexander the Great and Attila the Hun, among others, treading water in the boiling blood. "Oh, cool, a dark and creepy forest," Dante observed, taking in the vastness of the dark and creepy forest where they stood. "This one's a little convoluted," Virgil shared. "This is the Wood of the Suicides." "So where are all the people?" Dante asked. "Just wait for it," Virgil said. They stood quietly in the forest, the sound of flapping wings growing louder and louder in the night sky above. In the darkness, the chaos of the wings was disorienting, making it impossible for Dante to localize the sound, until a shadowy shape swooped down almost directly in front of him, grabbing onto a branch with its talons and tore it away from the trunk. The tree began to bleed. From the depths of its inner rings came screams of agony. Immediately, the creatures above swooped down en masse to tear limb after limb away from the trees. The forest erupted in painful shrieks. It was feeding time. "I still don't follow," Dante admitted to Virgil. "Well, these were people that did harm to their human form, so they're denied one here. They're only able to speak while being torn and destroyed. While they're in pain," Virgil explained. Dante didn't really know what to say. After a moment, Virgil took Dante by the arm, leading him deeper into the forest, until they heard a commotion in front of them. There were people who were being pursued. And yes, they were naked, by hungry dogs, through patches of thorns in the woods. It was not a fun time, because if you do get caught, there are wild dogs, and if you don't, well, you're still running through thorns. Moving slowly, Dante and Virgil picked their way through the thorns until they saw, up ahead, a light. It flickered, as though something was burning. At this point, they were pretty used to omnipresent screams. Dante and Virgil parted the leaves on the edge of the forest and were immediately blasted by a wall of heat. Before them was round 3 of Circle 7, the burning sands. This presented quite the challenge. Even to Virgil, the tour guide, he stood for quite some time, contemplating just how they were going to cross the burning sands. Not only was the landscape obviously burning, but in a nice little touch of overkill, fire rained down from the sky as well. Here, there were 3 types of sinners, each kind recognized by what they were doing. The blasphemers were forced to lie down on the sands, the burning rain scalding them as it fell. The people who had sinned against nature, or people who were perceived to have been going against the natural order of things, were seen running across the sands, and the people who committed usury were huddling on the sands. Usury, if you're not familiar with the term, being lending money at unreasonably high interest. Yes, according to Dante, usury is worse than murder. Eventually, the pair edged their way across the burning sands, meeting more of Dante's contemporaries who had died. From the other side, Dante and Virgil looked out over a cliff into a dark, dirty, and stinking pit. Apparently, those were all over the place in hell. Virgil yanked the cord that served as part of Dante's belt and tossed it off into the abyss. Dante loudly complained as Virgil lifted a finger, urging them both to take a step back and be prepared to be awed. Wings began beating from below the cliff, stronger and faster, as Geryon, the monster of fraud, rose from the haze below. He was a giant with a tail and wings of a dragon, complete with a poisonous scorpion-like tip, the body of a lion, and the face of a human. For once, the creature didn't have a problem with taking Dante somewhere, so after some talk, the pair stepped forward to board their freaky monster transport. Virgil said that he would sit in back. Geryon liked to get stabby with his scorpion tail, and one touch of it would kill Dante, so it was best if Dante didn't sit there. Dante agreed and boarded the giant angry dragon fairy. There's flying, and then there's grabbing the stinky fur of a violent chimera as you're descending into the penultimate circle of hell. Though that still might be better than some airlines out there. You see the pictures, but I'm surprised it took this long to find a horned demon in hell. You think they'd be all over the place, Dante said, as they looked down on the first bolgia of the last circle. A bolgia is like a ditch, and with these last 2 circles, it's kind of like a Russian nesting doll situation, where you get 12 circles for the price of 2. In the first ditch, Dante saw panderers and seducers. Since they spurred people on toward their own selfish, destructive desires, these people were continually spurred on by horned demons, with sharp lashes, forever. It's not the most creative circle, but it does get the job done. Among the sufferers was Jason, of Jason and the Argonauts fame, presumably after what he did to Medea. Dante also went on to name drop a few more contemporaries, forever tarnishing their names before they moved on to the next ditch. Luckily, there were a series of bridges arcing between the different ditches that also doubled as observatory decks, so they could safely watch all the hubbub below. No sense taking a stinky snowball to the face or having to tiptoe through boiling blood if you didn't have to. The symbolism of the next ditch was less obvious, but no less painful. There were feet as far as the eye could see, and they were on fire. The owners of said feet were not happy, judging by their loud wailing. Of course, Dante and Virgil couldn't see them because they were shoved into holes. These were the Simoniacs, or people guilty of simony, the selling of church favors and offices. It relates to the fortune teller, named Simon, in the New Testament, who offered St. Peter money for the Holy Spirit. Apparently, the holes resembled medieval Italian baptismal fonts, so those assigned to the circle were turned upside down in them in mockery. The good news was that they wouldn't have their feet on fire forever. The bad news is that when new tenants came to occupy their spots, they wouldn't be able to vacate, just be pushed further down into the darkness. By now, these holes were simply eternally long shafts, packed with Simoniacs all the way down. Dante the writer and character felt a lot of outrage toward the corruption of church offices and decided to stick to Pope Nicholas III. We're not going to get into church politics, but the medieval popes were an interesting and oftentimes horrifying bunch. Anyway, on to the next ditch. Dante took in the sight before making his guess. He said, "Okay, I feel like I'm close to something, but I'm going to need a hint." "Fortune tellers," Virgil said. Dante thought about, oh, got it. Their heads are turned backwards because they attempted to look into the future. So now they have to walk around always looking backward. They're blinded with tears, kind of further adding insult to injury, but overall not a bad part of the circle. "Yeah, for real," Virgil agreed. "Want to hang out and talk about my hometown?" And they did. This chapter contains a long digression describing Virgil's hometown, one that I will not replicate. They moved on when they deemed they had enough filler to round out the canto. "Do you think that was a bad idea, tricking those demons and getting them stuck in tar?" Dante asked after the next circle. "Nah," Virgil said. But then he heard the wings behind them, and the yelling. The demons, now freed from the tar, were in hot pursuit, and they were not happy about it. "Okay, yeah, it was a bad idea," Virgil shouted. "Run!" It had all started when they crossed the bridge to the next ditch, and Virgil told Dante to hide behind a rock while he negotiated their safe passage with the demons up ahead. Ditch 5 was for grafters, or people in political positions who took bribes. They were dropped in the bubbling pitch, and if they ever wanted to come up and not be face down in tar, then they risked demons clawing chunks from their bodies, ostensibly because they did their deeds in secret. And, like they figuratively took chunks of people in monetary form, the demons literally took chunks of them. Dante did not have time to be concerned with any of the symbolism this time, because down in the ninth circle, things were getting dangerous. Even more so than his encounter with Medusa and Dis, and even Gerion's poisonous and unpredictable tale. Sure, Dante basically had an all-access pass to hell, the very worst all-access pass, by the way, but as we mentioned last time, demons were kind of known for not really being super obedient to God's will. It was pretty much their defining characteristic. They ended up fearing God enough to let Dante pass, but oh, would you look at that? The bridge over this ditch was out. One of the demons gave them a sideways smile. Guess Dante better walk with them to the nearest bridge to the next one. And oh yeah, Dante could definitely trust them. No need to worry about us throwing you into the pitch and ripping you to pieces like a pack of wild dogs. Another demon sneered at Dante. Dante narrowed his eyes. That was exactly what he was worried about, and he could see Virgil was worried about it too. They didn't want to upset the demons, and they really didn't have another choice, so they agreed to go with him to the next bridge. As they walked along the edge of the circle, Dante tried to cut the tension by striking up conversations with some of the souls, but that was a bad idea. The demons were uncontrollably drawn to the souls, attacking them at every chance. That's when Dante got an idea. He started calling more and more souls to the surface. When a larger than normal number appeared, the demons couldn't resist any longer, and they abandoned Dante and Virgil and lunged for the souls. A few of them got stuck in the pitch themselves, and the others had to stop their destruction to organize a rescue attempt. It ended up being this whole big thing, and Dante's plan actually worked. Virgil and Dante spotted the next bridge and slipped off during the confusion. And that's where we picked up this part. The pair was running fast, and the gaggle of angry demons were gaining on them with every stride. Apparently demons fall into the pitch all the time, so it wasn't as much of a struggle for them as Dante had hoped. The pair sprinted for the bridge as fast as they could, leaning into every stride, legs trying to keep up with their bodies, until at the very last minute, it became clear that they were not going to make it. The demons were just too fast. Dante felt a push, stumbled, and rolled onto the ground and over the edge. Virgil leapt off the edge, into the next ditch, staying close behind, having shoved Dante out of the way of the demon's reach. Bravely curled in a ball with arms wrapped around his head, Dante fully expected to be set upon by vicious demons, except that there were none. They all remained on the ridge above, seething with rage. Virgil explained that the demons couldn't leave their post, so the pair was safe from them. But now their aerial view of the ditch was gone, and they were now in the ditch, with the souls, and it was super weird. Luckily, this next ditch wasn't horribly violent like the last one. Instead, a crowd of old men and women shuffled around in circles, struggling with every step. I have never been so happy to be surrounded by hypocrites, Virgil beamed, standing up and dusting himself off. Oh yeah, and these are the hypocrites. They walk around in gilded robes that way, well, I'm not sure, but they're made of lead, so it's not light. Dante could see the people straining under the weight of the robes. They had to keep moving, had to keep pretending the robe was weightless. It symbolized their deceit and the sin that constantly weighed down the hypocrite, all while they pretended to be holy. It was a weight that they had carried on earth, and it was one that they would literally bear for all eternity. Dante covered his mouth when he realized what they were walking on. It was brutal even for hell. Dante stopped two jovial friars from his home city. Dante asked who the guy in the road was, because there was someone crucified to the floor of hell. Dante learned from these surprisingly upbeat friars that the exceptionally unfortunate soul was Caiaphas, the high priest who had been the main proponent of Jesus' crucifixion. He was now on the floor of hell, and the path of the hypocrites took them over the stakes in his hands and his feet. He had to suffer the weight of the world's hypocrisy. Even Virgil winced a bit at this one, and asked if there was a path up to the walkway. The friars pointed to a very clear and easily climbable path up the wall of the ditch. "So why don't you ever try to escape?" asked Dante, and they motioned to their robes made of lead, then to the steep incline. Even they didn't want to take that on. Dante shrugged. Fair enough. He said goodbye to the friars, and he and Virgil climbed the path up to the other side of the ditch. Once again, they were back on track. Dante was so glad to be back above it all, too, because this next ditch was looking rough. Men and women had their hands bound by reptiles, held fast for all eternity. Other creatures flew through the air, diving to stab the people in their jugular veins. It wasn't the typical result of being stabbed in the jugular, but a much more painful one. The individual burst into flames and crumpled into ash, conscious during all of it. They would then reform, painfully, from the ashes, and a reptile would recoil around their wrists to begin the entire process over again. All right, and now we're headed down into that, Virgil announced. Are you serious? Aren't I in danger of being attacked by reptiles and burning down to ash? I mean, we just got up here. No thank you, Dante replied. Yeah, Virgil agreed. It does seem a bit contradictory, but you need to go down there and talk to some people or something. Honestly, this whole thing is pretty uneven in terms of stakes. Anyway, down we go. The seventh ditch ended up being even weirder than anticipated. The people he thought he was seeing were not actually people. Well, not completely. This ditch held thieves, and in the same way that these souls had stolen from others on Earth, their actual humanity was slowly being stolen from them. Every time they reappeared from the ashes, they were a little less human and a little more reptilian. Everyone in this ditch existed in a painful middle ground between human and monster, no one really knowing what or who they were. Dante stopped and chatted with some people known as the Five Noble Thieves of Florence. They were, of course, thieves, and despite being in hell, they had apparently done enough to earn the noble honorific. In the next ditch, Dante found that he had a lot of personal baggage. Dante was apparently the chief magistrate in the city of Florence at one point. but he was forced into exile by evil advisors to a person of a higher station. Well, this next ditch was that of evil advisors. Since they moved around secretly, they spent eternity hidden from view, but not in darkness. That would apparently be too nice. They stood in giant tongues of flame, burned, but not consumed. Dante scanned the sea of faces, but didn't see anyone he recognized until... Wait, Dante said. Is that Odysseus? Odysseus from the Trojan War and the Odyssey? Yeah, Virgil said. Wait, how do you have any idea what Odysseus looks like? Don't worry about details like that, Dante said. The poem sure doesn't. Anyway, Odysseus, the crafty guy who came up with the idea of the Trojan horse and had a bunch of sweet adventures. He turned to gush over Odysseus. I am a huge fan. Can you tell me about your adventures? Odysseus looked at Virgil with a, do I really have to, face, and the poet nodded. Odysseus sighed and got started rehashing part of the Odyssey, because if your epic poem is feeling a bit light, you can always crib part of the Odyssey. Luckily for Odysseus, they were interrupted about 30 lines in by someone who had recognized Dante's Italian accent, and the story takes a digression from a digression and starts talking about 13th century Italy. But to be fair, who hasn't done that? The following two ditches were even more brutal than the last. Ditch 9 was for the sowers of discord, and there were 3 classes: sowers of religious, political, and familial discord. In that area, the souls were forced to walk in a big circle, and then at some point a demon would slice open their abdomens, and they would be forced to hold up their own entrails as they walked. Eventually, they would heal, only to be sliced again when they met the demon on their next trip around the circle. Virgil pulled at Dante, who was straining to see if someone he knew was in the sowers of discord, which, sidebar, it's kind of terrible to be like, I knew this guy. He was terrible, so I'd really like to see his abdomen painfully sliced open by a demon before we hit the road. Virgil rolled his eyes and pulled Dante onto the pandemonium that was the 10th and final ditch of Circle 8 of Hell. It was a greatest hits, pun kind of intended, of hell, and they were punished by darkness, filth, thirst, diseases, painful scabs, and each other. The people here weren't just being punished. They were actively attacking each other by hitting, scratching, and biting. There were 4 subdivisions of falsifiers, and the people in this realm were the alchemists. And I'm not sure if this was literally supposed to be alchemy or people just leading others to believe that it was. Either way, Dante mingled here as he had along the way. The next group was the falsifiers of other people, so people who were imposters. Dante met a woman named Mira who lusted after her own father and disguised herself as another to, satisfy that lust. It's weird that out of all those, that disguising is the worst sin. But hey, I haven't been welcomed into the company of poets such as Homer and Ovid, so I won't question Dante on that one. The next group were the falsifiers of coin. I wish I had saved my snark for this one, because really, counterfeiting coins is among the second worst sins of hell? The last group was that of false witnesses, or liars. Anyway, Dante stood there, getting probably too into an argument between liars, until Virgil chastised him at last, saying that it's time to go. They were about to enter the 9th and final circle of hell, a cold, dark hole lined with statues of giants loomed ahead. The pair crept toward the edge of the central well, as it was called. This was it. This was where the trek through hell would end. Dante could not see down into the darkness, and he pulled his cloak close as the icy wind from below whipped and burned his skin. Dante, despite all he had seen, became filled with dread. It hadn't been the pain or torture that finally did it, but rather the yawning, aching nothingness of an existence apart from God. He shuddered. How are we going to get down there? Asked Dante, afraid of what might rise from the pit. He shot a look at his guide when no response came. Virgil wasn't looking down, but up. Them, he whispered, pointing to the statues. Except they weren't statues. They were giants, chained to the edge of the pit, and they were the traitors of old. One of them began speaking unintelligibly to Dante. Virgil whispered that that giant was Nimrod, usually, though not biblically, associated with the Tower of Babel. No one could understand that guy, so apparently he could be safely ignored. The others were some of the giants who had rebelled against the Greek gods. We don't need to go into who they were, but there was an epic struggle in Greek mythology where the giants rebelled against the Olympians. A number of giants were either captured or killed in that fight, and they were now suspended, chained halfway up in Circle 9, the Circle of Betrayal. Also among the giants was one that Hercules had killed during one of his naked wrestling match outings, about which I am not joking. His name was Antaeus, and Hercules had killed him on his way to the 11th labor by holding him off the ground and hugging him to death. It sounds funny, but it happens way too often in Greek myths. If you ever get the opportunity to hug Hercules, I would advise against it. Since he wasn't a betrayer, I'm not sure what he was doing down there. It was probably just because he got thrown in with the rest of the giants, or he missed hanging out with his friends. Regardless, he took pity on the pair of tiny, tiny travelers and offered to lower them down into the 9th circle. Virgil and Dante boarded the giant's palm for the most enjoyable ride to the 9th and final circle of hell that anyone could hope for. Wait, so the 9th circle, the one of treachery, it's frozen? Hell has frozen over? Dante couldn't believe it. Yes, and Dante, you're at the worst place in the universe. You're at like a 7. You need to tamp that visible enthusiasm down to like a 2, maybe a 3, Virgil said, talking dramatically with his hands. Yeah, for real, man. We have to live here, they heard from the ice below. Oh, hi, head sticking out of a frozen lake, Dante said, and asked what they were in for. There, through the ice, was a talking head. This was the subdivision of treachery against family, named Cana for, well, Cain. Those assigned here were frozen up to the neck, able to move, but just enough so that they could bow their heads to cry, shielded from the winds so that their eyes didn't freeze. Wow, hell is raw, Dante murmured. Hey, wait, is that guy eating another guy? Just up ahead was the subdivision known as Antenora. There, sure enough, was a guy gnawing on the head of another guy. Hi, Dante said after he rushed over to Antenora. Greetings, Count Ugolino said as he wiped his bloody mouth on his victim, / all he cared to eat buffet. Dante stared in horror at the close-up detail. Count Ugolino stared back for a moment. So, kind of obvious question, why are you eating your neighbor's head? Dante asked. Let me tell you a story, Count Ugolino said, between bites. It was the super sad story of these two men. They had been colleagues of sorts, fellow plotters of something against their country. The Gnawi in the ground, however, had betrayed Ugolino, the Gnawer. He had sealed Ugolino in a tower along with his sons, his old friend forced to watch his offspring die before he himself died. Much, much later. Hell is dark stuff, he concluded. Dante shuddered at the story. Ugh. He was good on this part of hell, and he was quite ready to get going. They said goodbye and walked away. Round 3, unsurprisingly, proved to be even harsher. Those assigned to Ptolemea, the place for people treacherous to guests and hosts, were also packed in ice, except that they had an even tougher time. Half of their faces were above the ice surface, so their eyeballs freeze, and they are denied even the comfort of their tears. On marched the banners of the King of Hell, Virgil recited with a sigh, looking downward into the darkness, the wind rushing toward them, stinging their faces. This was it. This was the last division of the last circle. This was the center of hell. Arm your soul against all dread, Virgil murmured, pursing his lips, before wrapping his cloak around his face. From the depths, they heard giant wings, fast at work, no doubt the source of all the wind. Risking a step out into the frozen lake, he came into full view. Dante barely noticed the people frozen in the lake, at the center of hell, conscious and contorted in all positions. His blood ran cold, and he stood in awe and terror of Satan himself, frozen up to the waist in the center of the lake. The giants who had lured them down into this final circle were smaller than just one of Satan's fingers. The constant flapping of his wings seemed like it was both unproductive and they were the reason for the ice all around them. He would forever rage and try to break free, and thus the ninth circle would always be frozen. Dante tipped his head back, looking to the top of the hairy mountain standing before them. In a perversion of the Godhead, Satan had 3 faces. The center one was fiery red, while the other 2, the left and the right, were just normal, extremely ugly and horrific heads. Is he chewing something? Good eyes, Virgil said. The 3 worst sinners of all time will spend their time in hell constantly being chewed by Satan himself and whipped by the freezing air. Who are they? Dante asked, squinting. You tell me, Virgil said through his cloak. You're the poet. Dante squinted again, and yeah, he could make him out. The 3 people being chewed forever in Satan's mouth were 1, Judas the betrayer of Jesus, because duh, but 2 and 3 were slightly more obscure. They were Brutus and Cassius, the 2 people that orchestrated the betrayal and murder of Julius Caesar. Their screams echoed across the frozen wastes of the ninth circle. According to Dante, the worst traitors in the history of traitors had to spend all eternity together. Satan had betrayed God, Judas had betrayed Jesus Christ, and Cassius and Brutus had betrayed Julius Caesar. One of those things is not like the others. So there we have it, Virgil announced over the icy winds of hell whipping all around them. The worst of the sinners in the coldest, darkest pit of hell. What was that? Did you just roll your eyes? Is the coldest, darkest pit of hell not intense enough for you? Not really, Dante shouted back over the noise. I mean, let me rephrase that. Is a big 3-headed guy chewing 3 other guys really the worst thing I've seen today? No. I mean, we saw a tornado of naked people being boiled alive in a river of blood, a frozen guy eating another frozen guy, and people literally tearing each other to pieces. I've been chased by demons, harpies, Cerberus, a minotaur, and more, and I've been yelled at by more mythological monsters than I care to remember. So, no, the ninth circle of hell did not live up to the hype. I will say, though, that this place is the worst. So, lesson learned, Virgil. Now, can we please go? Virgil smiled and nodded. This guy was going to be all right. All right, well, hope you have some energy left, because we have a long walk up, back through hell, Virgil said, setting off past Satan in the opposite direction from which they had come. Really, there was no easier way. Oh, Virgil was laughing. Yeah, I'm just kidding, Virgil said. There's a shortcut out. We just need to climb down Satan's hairy backside, he said, pointing to a barely visible hole in the ice. You cannot be serious, Dante said, staggering backwards. Yeah, no big deal. We just need to cling to the icy hair of Satan himself as we lower ourselves down his side and toward his rear end. It's pretty simple. Then that's it. We are finished with hell, and you'll be able to check out purgatory, which is, less hellish, but also kind of less interesting too. You'll see. Anyway, let's go. Or we could stay here, in the worst part of the worst place of this or any universe. Personally, I'm cold, so hop on, because the Virgil Express is leaving the station. Hop on? Dante had so many questions, despite the weirdness of this entire trip. Yeah, you jump on my back, and I carry you down for some reason. I don't know. It's in my contract. But we're almost out of this literal hellhole, so let's just do this, Virgil said, and bent down so Dante could hop on. It was a surprising ride, even for a climb down Satan's hairy backside. They never actually reached the worst part of the climb, because as soon as they were a few feet below the ice, everything turned. They were no longer climbing down, they were climbing up, until Virgil lifted them over the edge and onto a rocky floor. Welcome to purgatory, Virgil said, catching his breath and laying back in exhaustion. The start of purgatory and end of hell were 2 sides of the same coin. In fact, in their descent through hell, the pair had crossed through the center of the earth, and now they were on the other side, thus the weird gravity switch. As the Virgil Express clung to Satan's hair, Dante looked to his left, and 2 long, hairy goat legs stretched up to the sky and flailed impotently. This was the spot where Satan had landed, face down on the earth. After being cast from heaven, the pit of hell had formed around his body, and so here, on the surface of the earth, he would remain stuck, upside down. Putting these stinky, hairy demon legs kicking fruitlessly aside, Dante turned to the vast, blue sky. It was morning, and Virgil and Dante had successfully made it through hell. The air had never smelled sweeter, and the morning sky had never been more beautiful. They had made it. So, is this purgatory? Dante asked. We're on this island, we just sort of wait around to be led into paradise? What's that? No, I wish. There's the whole theme with lessons and all that here, too. See that mountain there? Virgil asked. You mean the one that stretches up interminably past the clouds and into the sky? Dante replied. Yep, that's the one. We get to climb that, Virgil said. All right, we've rested enough. Now let's get going. And that's where we're going to leave Virgil and Dante today. They're out of part one of their epic poem, The Inferno, and at some point, we'll absolutely return to their journey in part two, their trip through purgatory. And now, it's time for the best of the worst. The villain this time is the Walrus. He's a comic book villain from Marvel. Hubert, the future Walrus, was a cab driver in New York, but he was also a dutiful nephew. You see, Hubert's uncle was a mad scientist. Well, part-time mad scientist. Actually, more of a hobbyist mad scientist. He was a full-time janitor at the university where he used to work as a professor, but he was let go because his grants kept getting denied for funding. I mean, I worked in the research field for a number of years, and it's tough. It's tougher, though, when your grants include turning people into human walrus hybrids. Anyway, because it's insanely unethical to test your experimental walrus ray on humans, and because it's pretty difficult to recruit humans for walrus ray trials with no funding, Hubert was his uncle's only test subject. He was zapped by a magic ray that his uncle built on lunch breaks, nights, and weekends, and he was given the proportional speed, strength, and agility of a walrus. Yeah. The walrus calls himself a mass destructionist, which really means, I like to break stuff, but I hate planning. Hubert's uncle had plans, though. The day after he gave his nephew super-ish walrus powers, the Beast, from the X-Men, was giving a talk at the university. The logic went that if Hubert took down the Beast publicly, then the uncle would finally get the recognition he deserved and do TV interviews and stuff. That was actually his endgame. Beast and the other heroes present tried to hit the walrus, but because of his added walrus blubber, they bounced right back. Unfortunately, the walrus got very sleepy after getting distracted destroying stuff and fell asleep. In an attempt to cover up their public defeat at the hands of the walrus, the heroes claimed that it was all an act, so no one pressed charges against Hubert, and he got to walk away after a brief nap. He resurfaced years later when he teamed up with the White Rabbit, a very thinly veiled Playboy reference. The White Rabbit was a beautiful woman who married an elderly man to get his money after he died, which happened pretty quickly because she murdered him. She then donned rabbit ears and went all in with the theme, down to having a gun that shot razor carrots. Well, the White Rabbit teamed up with the Walrus to fight the hero known as Frogman because 70s comics are awesome, but then Spider-Man showed up. The Walrus explained that bit about him having proportional strength, agility, and speed of a walrus, and Spider-Man cracked up, giving the Walrus time to punch him in the head. The Walrus and the White Rabbit were subdued by Frogman and his son, Leapfrog, and everything seemed like it was over until the Walrus got up, looking for blood, and Spider-Man flicked him in the forehead and knocked him out cold. I guess he didn't have enough bouncy blubber on his face. If you're wondering, Hubert Carpenter, which is absolutely a Lewis Carroll illusion, is still at large, with his proportional size, speed, agility, and, intelligence of a walrus. That's it for this time. Today's episode was written by me, Jason Weiser, and edited and produced by Carissa Weiser. Our theme song is by the amazing Breakmaster Cylinder. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.